Have you ever imagined what it would be like to be working a regular night, doing what you do every day, and suddenly, everything explodes? 3 gunshots echoed in the parking lot of the roadside bar at 2:40 a.m. on a Tuesday. 3 dry sounds that cut through the silence of the empty road. Inside the bar, Cassie Reeves was cleaning the last drink of the night, ready to close and finally go home. But then she heard it. She heard the gunshots. She heard the screams. She heard the heavy silence that followed, and when she looked out the window, she saw something that would change her life forever. She saw 2 men lying on the asphalt. She saw the blood slowly spreading under the dim light of the lamppost, and she saw the shadow of someone fleeing. When the police arrived 6 minutes later, they found exactly what they expected to find at a crime scene. 2 bodies, bullet casings, and a witness. Cassie was behind the counter, crouched down, trembling so much she could barely hold the phone she'd used to call 911. Her hands were stained with coffee she'd spilled when the shooting started. Her apron was still tied around her waist, and her eyes were empty, shocked, like the eyes of someone who's just seen something they can no longer unsee. Have you ever been through that? Ever seen something that completely changed you? Something that made you realize the world isn't as safe as you thought. Her name is Cassie Reeves, 29 years old, a waitress for 4 years, at the same roadside bar between 2 small towns where nothing important ever happens, until that night, until those 3 shots, until she made the mistake of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the worst mistake of all, it wasn't being there, it was seeing everything. Because when you see something you shouldn't have seen, when you witness something someone very powerful wants to keep hidden, you cease to be a person. You become a problem that needs to be solved. Cassie didn't know it yet. That night, sitting in the back of the ambulance with a thermal blanket over her shoulders, all she knew was that she was afraid. Afraid of what she had seen. Afraid that whoever had shot those men might come back. Afraid that looking out the window at the wrong moment could cost her everything. The paramedics asked if she was injured. She shook her head. The police officers asked what she saw. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come out, because something inside her, some survival instinct, was saying, "Be careful. Be careful what you say. Be careful who you trust. Because the danger is not over yet." And she was right. Stay with me until the end. Because what happened after that night was worse than anything Cassie could have imagined. Because it wasn't just the shooters who became a threat. It was the entire city. It was the people who were supposed to protect her. It was the system that was supposed to seek justice. Everything turned against her. And suddenly, Cassie was no longer the victim. She was the suspect. The woman who knew too much. The woman who was hiding something. The woman who, in some incomprehensible way, had become guilty simply for having survived. Because that's how it works, isn't it? When something horrible happens, we need someone to blame. And it's always easier to blame the closest person, the most vulnerable, the one who has no power to defend themselves. Cassie was all of that. She was the invisible waitress no one really knew. The woman who came from somewhere else and never truly belonged. The perfect person to be made a scapegoat, and that's exactly what happened. Before she could even process the trauma of what she had seen, before she could even stop trembling, Cassie found herself at the center of an investigation, but not as a witness, as a suspect. And the town, that small town where she had tried to rebuild her life, where she had worked honestly, where she had finally begun to feel safe, that town turned its back on her in less than 24 hours. Because when you're an outsider, when you don't have deep roots, when you're just the waitress at the roadside bar, you have no one to defend you. You have no reputation to protect it. You only have your word. And your word, Cassie was learning the hard way, is worthless when everyone has already decided you're guilty. But there was someone who hadn't decided. Someone who looked at her that night and saw not guilt, but terror. Someone who asked the right questions and realized the answers didn't make sense. Someone who was about to choose her side when literally everyone else was on the opposite side. That someone was Sheriff Cole Brennan. He had arrived at the crime scene 15 minutes after the shooting, coming from a call in another part of the county. And when he first saw Cassie, sitting in that ambulance, with the blanket over her shoulders, and her eyes fixed on some distant point that only she could see, he recognized something. He recognized it because he had seen it before. In victims of domestic violence, in accident survivors, in people who had just gone through something traumatic and still couldn't process it. What he saw wasn't guilt. It was trauma. It was pure, visceral fear. Cole approached slowly. Not like the other officers had, with clipboards and accusatory tones. He simply sat beside her, maintained a respectful distance, and asked in a low voice, "Are you hurt?" Cassie shook her head without looking at him. "Did you see who shot?" And that's when something changed. Cassie turned her head. She looked at him, and Cole saw. He saw in her eyes not just fear, but a specific kind of terror. The terror of someone who knows they are in danger. She opened her mouth as if to answer, but then she hesitated. She looked around, at the other police officers, at the curious onlookers who were beginning to gather, and she closed her mouth again. In that hesitation, Cole understood everything. She had seen it. She knew exactly who had shot, but she was too afraid to say. And if she was so afraid to speak, it was because the danger was real. It was because whoever was behind it had enough power to silence her. And Cole, who had spent 15 years working in that county, who knew the schemes, the connections, the way things really worked beneath the respectable surface. Cole knew Cassie had reason to be terrified. If any of this has ever resonated with you, if you've ever felt discredited or alone when you needed support the most, share it in the comments. I want to know. Because these stories are about more than just suspense. They're about what happens when the world fails you. But Cole didn't press her. Not that night. He just said, "Okay, you don't have to talk now. But when you're ready, I'll listen." And then he did something none of the other officers did. He gave her his card. Not the official precinct card, but a piece of paper where he wrote his personal number. "If you need anything," he said. "Anything, call." Cassie took the paper with trembling hands and put it in her apron pocket. She didn't say thank you. She couldn't speak, but she nodded. And Cole saw in that small gesture that she understood. She understood that, maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. The following days proved how necessary that card would be, because the investigation took a turn that no one expected. Or rather, that no one should have expected if they were truly looking for the truth. The detective assigned to the case, a man named Frank Holloway from the neighboring town, arrived with theories already formed. Theories that placed Cassie at the center, not as a witness, as an accomplice, perhaps even as the mastermind. The questions he asked weren't "What did you see?" but "How did you know the victims? And how much did they owe you? And were you having an affair with one of them?" Questions that already assumed guilt, that already constructed a narrative where Cassie was the villain. And the city bought into this narrative without question. If this part resonated with you, if you felt the injustice of it in your heart, leave a like. It helps me know that you're feeling this with me. The regulars at the roadside bar, people Cassie had served for years, who knew how she drank her coffee, who chatted with her about the weather and their lives. Those same people started avoiding her. They started giving her sideways glances. They started whispering when she walked down the street. Mike, the bar owner, called her on the third day, not to ask how she was doing, not to offer support, but to say she was being put on temporary leave, that it would be better for everyone if she stayed away for a while. Until things calmed down, he said. But Cassie knew what that meant. It meant she was being fired for being a victim, for having the misfortune of being in the wrong place when the crime happened. Then came the threats. First was the graffiti on the door of the trailer where she lived. The word murderer painted in bright red, paint dripping like blood. Cassie called the police. They sent an officer who took pictures, filled out a report, and said it was probably teenagers vandalizing the place. No one investigated. no one cared. Because, to the town, Cassie had become the problem, and problems don't deserve protection. If you want to see more stories like this, stories about people who fight when no one believes in them, about real protection when the system fails, subscribe to the channel. I post every week, and every story matters. The next morning, the trailer window was broken, a rock thrown during the night while Cassie slept. She woke to the sound of shattering glass, the cold wind rushing through the hole, and shards scattered across the floor. And this time, she didn't call the police, because what was the point? They didn't believe her. They didn't protect her. They were too busy trying to build a case against her. So Cassie did what she always did. She tried to handle it alone. She cleaned up the shards. She covered the window with cardboard and duct tape. And she spent the night awake, sitting in the tiny kitchen, a kitchen knife beside her, jumping at every sound, every car that passed on the road. And that's how Cole found her. That's how everything truly changed. Because Cole hadn't forgotten about her. He hadn't mentally filed her away as just another case. He had kept thinking about her terrified eyes, about her hesitation when he asked if she had seen the shooter. And the more he thought about it, the more things didn't make sense in the official investigation. So the morning after the broken window incident, Cole decided to pay a visit, unofficial, just to check in, just to make sure she was okay. And it was what he found that made him understand the true gravity of the situation. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding who Cassie really was before that night is understanding why what happened to her was so devastating. Cassie Reeves wasn't just the waitress at the roadside bar. She was the waitress who knew Mr. Patterson liked his coffee with 2 spoonfuls of sugar and no cream. Who knew Mrs. Chen always ordered her apple pie warmed, never cold. Who remembered that Tommy, the trucker who stopped by every Tuesday, had a 5-year-old daughter named Emma and always asked how she was doing. Cassie cared. She truly cared. Not because she had to care, but because it was who she was. She had this way of making every person feel seen, even in a forgotten roadside bar where most of the customers were just passing faces. She'd worked at the roadside for 4 years. 4 years of double shifts, aching feet, smiling even when exhausted, carrying heavy trays and wiping sticky tables, and dealing with drunken customers who thought they had the right to touch her. But she endured it because she had a plan. A small but real dream. Cassie saved every penny she could. She kept her tips in a glass jar hidden under the sink. She dreamed of the day she'd have enough money to open her own little cafe. Nothing grand. Just a cozy place where she could serve good coffee, bake homemade cakes, and maybe, finally, belong somewhere. Have roots. Have something that was hers. But nobody knew that. Nobody knew about her dreams, about the glass jar, about the nights she stayed awake calculating how much she needed to save, how long it would take. Because Cassie had learned long ago not to share too much of herself. She had learned to keep her head down, not to draw attention to herself, to be polite, helpful, but never to open. That was her armor, the way she protected herself. And there was a reason for it. A reason she never told anyone in that town. Cassie had come from an even smaller place. A town where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were impossible. Where she had married at 21 to a man who seemed kind in front of others, but transformed into something completely different when the front door was closed. Her marriage had ended in violence. Not in a single dramatic explosion, but in years of control, of growing fear, of bruises hidden under long sleeves. She had managed to leave. She had gathered her courage one night when he was away on a business trip, packed her few belongings in a suitcase, and simply left, without looking back, without leaving an address. And she had rebuilt. God, how she had rebuilt. She had arrived in that new city knowing no one, without references, with nothing but determination. She had gotten the job at the roadside because Mike, the owner, urgently needed someone and she was willing to work any shift. And for 4 years, she had worked, she had saved. He had remained invisible. He had created a small but safe life. A life where she didn't need to look over her shoulder, where she could sleep at night without fear of hearing the door opening, where she could finally breathe. Until that night, until those 3 shots, until everything fell apart again. Because the truth about Cassie is that she never sought trouble. She never wanted to be at the center of anything. She just wanted to exist quietly, work honestly, and one day, maybe, have something of her own. But trouble found her anyway. Because sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you try to stay safe. Sometimes danger finds you. Anyway, and when it does, when you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, when you see something you shouldn't have seen, everything you've built can crumble in seconds. The transformation that began to happen in Cassie after that night was painful to witness. The woman who always smiled, who always had a kind word, who made everyone feel welcome. That woman began to disappear. Cole saw it when he went to her trailer that morning. He saw it in her eyes. They were no longer the eyes of someone who believed in the best of people. They were the eyes of someone who had learned, in the most brutal way, that the world is not safe, that people are not trustworthy, that you can do everything right and still be destroyed. He knocked on the trailer door. No one answered, but he heard movement inside. He heard the sound of cautious footsteps, of someone approaching the door, but not opening it. "Cassie," he called. "It's me, Sheriff Brennan. I just came to see if you're all right." Silence. And then, after a long moment, the door opened. Just a crack. And when Cole saw her face, saw her red, swollen eyes, saw the way she was holding something behind her back, he understood. He understood that she wasn't all right. Far from all right. "May I come in?" he asked gently. Cassie hesitated. And in that hesitation, Cole saw how much she had changed. 4 days ago, she was the waitress who smiled at strangers, who trusted people by default. Now she barely trusted enough to let a law enforcement officer into her trailer. But eventually, she nodded. She opened the door a little wider, and Cole went in, and immediately he saw the graffiti-covered door she hadn't managed to clean completely. He saw the window covered in cardboard and tape. He saw the shards of glass she had swept into a corner. He saw the kitchen knife on the small table. And he saw Cassie, standing in the middle of it all, looking smaller than she actually was, looking broken. "When did this happen?" Cole asked, pointing to the window. "Last night," Cassie replied lifelessly. "Did you call the police?" She let out a bitter laugh. "I called when they painted the door. They said it was teenage vandalism, that it wasn't anything serious. So no, I didn't call this time. What's the point?" And Cole felt a pang in his chest. Because she was right. The system had failed her. The police, who should have protected her, were too busy treating her as a suspect. And now she was there, alone, terrified, defending herself with a kitchen knife. Cole looked around the trailer. It was small, but clean, organized. There were photos on the refrigerator. Photos of landscapes, sunsets, beautiful places. No photos of people. No family photos. And there were books. Books about how to start a small business. About managing cafes. About recipes. And Cole understood. He understood that Cassie had dreams. That she was building something. And that all of that was being taken from her. Not by the shooters, but by the city. By the people who should have been supporting her. "Cassie," Cole said, turning to her. "You can't stay here. It's not safe." She laughed again, that humorless laugh. "And where am I supposed to go? I don't have money for anywhere else. I don't have family. I don't have friends here who..." She stopped, took a deep breath. "I don't have anyone." And it was in those words, in that simple and devastating admission, that Cole made the decision. The decision that would change everything. Not because it was protocol. Not because it was his job. But because looking at her, hearing that, and doing nothing, that wasn't something he could live with. "You have someone now," he said. "Grab your things. You're coming with me." Cassie looked at him as if he were speaking another language. "What? I can't." "Yes, you can. I have a safe place. Temporary. Just until we find out who's doing this, and why. But, why are you doing this? She asked. And there was so much genuine confusion in her voice, so much disbelief that anyone would care, that Cole felt anger. Anger at the city that had failed her so completely that she couldn't even believe anyone genuinely wanted to help. Because it's the right thing to do, he replied. Simple as that. And for the first time since that horrible night, Cassie felt something that wasn't fear. It wasn't much. It wasn't complete confidence, but it was something. It was the smallest spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to face this completely alone. Comment below when you're at your lowest point, when nobody believes in you. One person who chooses to stay changes everything, doesn't it? Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened to Cassie wasn't just a poorly conducted investigation. It was a systematic collapse of everything that should have protected her. And that collapse began with Detective Frank Holloway. He arrived from the neighboring town the day after the shooting, wearing an expensive suit for that area, carrying a leather briefcase, and with an expression that clearly said he already knew everything he needed to know. He didn't come looking for the truth. He came with the truth already decided. And that truth placed Cassie at the center of it all. The first time he interrogated Cassie was at the police station, in a windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. He didn't even properly introduce himself. He just sat down, opened his briefcase, and began. Did you know the victims? Cassie, still in shock, still processing the trauma, shook her head. They were customers. They came to the bar sometimes. Sometimes or often. Often, I guess, I didn't. I didn't keep records. Did you serve them drinks the night of the incident? Yes. I was the only one working. I served everyone. And you were the last person to see them alive. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation disguised as a statement. Cassie looked at him, confused. I don't know. Maybe. They went out to the parking lot, and then I heard the shots. You heard. But you didn't see. I saw later. I saw through the window. I saw them on the ground. But you didn't see who shot them. Cassie hesitated. And in that hesitation, Holloway found what he was looking for. He leaned forward. Cassie, how much did they owe you? What? Nothing? They always paid for the drinks. I'm not talking about drinks. I'm talking about money, drugs, favors, whatever was going on between you two. And that's when Cassie understood. She understood that he didn't believe her, that he had already decided she was lying, hiding something, involved in some way. I wasn't involved in anything, she said, her voice trembling. I just worked there. I just served drinks and cleaned tables, and she knows more than she's saying, Holloway told the officer, taking notes. He said it loudly, in front of Cassie, as if she weren't there, as if she were already guilty, and before Cassie could protest, before she could properly defend herself, the interrogation ended. Holloway left, and Cassie stood there, alone in that cold room, realizing she was in a completely different kind of danger, not just from the shooters, but from the very system that was supposed to protect her. The rumors started that very afternoon, small, whispered, but rumors in small towns spread like wildfire. I heard she knew those men. I heard there was something between her and one of them. Why else? Would she be the only witness? Why else would she be so nervous? And the cruelest one, roadside bar waitresses. You know how they are. The insinuation was always there, just below the surface. The idea that Cassie, because she worked in a bar, because she was a woman, because she was single, must be involved in something shady, something illegal, something immoral. People who had been kind to her for years began to turn their faces away. Mr. Patterson, who always left a generous tip and asked how she was doing, crossed the street when he saw her coming. Mrs. Chen, who always had a kind word, pretended not to see her at the supermarket. Tommy, the truck driver, stopped showing up at the bar altogether. And when Cassie tried to go to the local market to buy groceries, The conversations stopped when she went inside. People stared, they judged, and then they went back to whispering as soon as she passed. The impact of this on Cassie was devastating, because she had spent 4 years building trust in that community. For years trying to prove she was trustworthy, hardworking, good, and in less than 48 hours, all of that was destroyed. She was no longer Cassie, the kind waitress. She was Cassie, the suspect. Cassie, the woman who knew more than she let on. Cassie, the possible accomplice to murder. And there was nothing she could do to change that narrative. Because once the town decides who you are, it doesn't matter who you really are. Mike, the owner of the roadside, called on the 3rd day. Cassie answered, naively expecting him to ask if she was okay, to offer support, to say he understood she was a victim, not a criminal. But that wasn't it. Cassie, look, I'm sorry, but I need to put you on leave for now. Leave, she repeated, confused. It's temporary, just until things calm down. The customers are worried, and with all the police attention, it's not good for business. Mike, I didn't do anything. I was working. I almost died. Night, I know, but you understand, right? It's only temporary. But it wasn't temporary, and they both knew it. It was a dismissal. Disguised with kind words, but a dismissal nonetheless. Cassie was being punished for being a victim, for being in the wrong place, for seeing something she shouldn't have seen. And when she hung up the phone, when reality truly hit, she realized she hadn't just lost her job. She'd lost her source of income, lost her way to pay rent, lost her path to that little cafe she dreamed of opening. For years of saving, of sacrifice, of dreams, all going down the drain because she had the misfortune of working in a bar where a murder had occurred. And then came the graffiti. The word murderer painted in bright red on her trailer door. Cassie saw it when she returned from the market, carrying the last of her purchases. She saw it and felt her legs weaken, because it wasn't just vandalism, it was a threat. It was the city saying, we decide who you are, and you have no power to change that. She called the police, as any citizen should, and they sent a young officer who took photos, filled out a form, and said with complete indifference, probably kids, you know how teenagers are. They do this kind of thing for fun. Fun, Cassie repeated, incredulous. They called me a murderer. How is that fun? The officer shrugged. I'll record it. But honestly, without cameras, without witnesses, there's not much we can do. And he left. He left Cassie. There, in front of her trailer, staring at that horrible word painted on the door. And she realized something that chilled her to the bone. The police weren't going to help her. The city wasn't going to defend her. She was alone. Completely, devastatingly alone. The transformation in Cassie's life was swift and brutal. In less than a week, she went from having a stable life, a job, a routine, dreams for the future, to having nothing. No income, no support, no security. Her savings, that glass jar hidden under the sink, began to dwindle. She used it to buy food, to pay the rent that was due. And with every penny spent, she saw her dreams slipping further away. That little cafe, that place of her own. That life she had planned so carefully, all slipping through her fingers. And the worst part was the silence. The way people simply stopped seeing her. She walked down the street and was invisible again, but not in the way she used to be. Before, she was invisible, because she was just the waitress. Now, she was invisible because people actively chose not to look, chose not to acknowledge, chose not to engage, because engaging with Cassie meant associating with trouble, and nobody wanted trouble. The most painful revelation for Cassie was realizing she had no one. Absolutely no one. She had spent 4 years in that city and hadn't made a single real friend, not for lack of kindness, but because she had been too careful. She had kept people at a distance. She had protected her past so fiercely that she never let anyone in. And now, when she needed someone the most, When a single friend could make all the difference, there was no one. No door to knock on, no number to call, no shoulder to cry on. She thought about leaving, about gathering what little money she had left, putting it all in her old car, and simply disappearing, starting over somewhere else, again, like she had done before. But then, she realized something terrible. If she ran away now, everyone would assume it was because she was guilty. The town would see it as confirmation. See, she ran away. She was involved all along. And Cassie, who had spent her whole life trying to prove she was good, that she was innocent, that she deserved respect, couldn't bear the thought of letting this false narrative be the last word about her. So she stayed. She stayed in that trailer with the graffiti-covered door and the broken window. She stayed truly scared, even alone, even knowing that each day was a battle just to survive. And it was at that lowest point, in that moment of absolute despair, that Cole appeared, that he saw what no one else had seen, that he offered what no one else had offered. Not judgment, not suspicion, but help, real help. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this, because the moment Cole Brennan arrived at that crime scene was the moment everything could have gone differently. Cole had received the call at 2:53 a.m., 3 shots reported in the parking lot of the roadside bar. Possible victims. He was 20 minutes away, dealing with a domestic dispute that had just been resolved. And when he heard the address on the radio, something tightened in his chest. Because he knew that bar. He knew the people who worked there. And he immediately thought of Cassie. He sped up. He didn't exactly follow the speed limit. And when he arrived, 15 minutes after the shots, the scene was already chaotic. Red and blue lights flashing, yellow, tape being unrolled, officers walking through the parking lot, marking evidence, and 2 bodies covered with plastic tarps. Cole got out of the car and his training kicked in automatically. He should go to the bodies first, confirm the victims, assess the scene. But his eyes searched for something else. Searched until they found it. Cassie, sitting in the back of an ambulance parked on the other side of the parking lot. She was wrapped in a silvery thermal blanket, the kind paramedics give to people in shock. Her body was completely still, but her eyes were fixed on some distant point that only she could see. Cole had seen dozens of witnesses in shock over 15 years of work. He had seen people crying, screaming, hyperventilating. He had seen people in denial, in anger, in confusion. But what he saw in Cassie was different. It was silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. The kind of silence that comes when your mind is trying to process something impossible to process. Cole approached slowly. He didn't want to frighten her more than she already was. One of the paramedics was beside her, checking vital signs, but Cassie didn't seem to notice. She was there, but she wasn't. Her body present, her mind somewhere far away. How is she? Cole asked the paramedic softly. Physically, unharmed, but she's in deep shock. She hasn't said a word since we arrived. Cole nodded. He dismissed the paramedic with a gentle gesture and sat on the edge of the ambulance, next to Cassie. He kept a respectful distance. He didn't touch her. He just stayed there, present. Cassie, he said softly. She didn't react, didn't turn her head, didn't blink. Just kept staring at that invisible point. Cole waited. Because sometimes, he'd learned, the best thing you can do is just be present. Don't push, don't demand, just be. And after a long minute, maybe 2, Cassie blinked. Once, slowly, and then turned her head slightly in his direction. Not enough to look directly at him, but enough to show that she had heard. Are you hurt? Cole asked. His voice was low, calm, non-judgmental. Cassie shook her head. A small, almost imperceptible movement. But Cole saw it. Are you in pain anywhere? Another negative movement. Okay. It's all right. You're safe now. And it was in those words, in that simple promise, that something changed on Cassie's face. Her eyes filled with tears. Not tears that fell. Just tears that gathered, trembling at the edges, threatening to overflow. Because you're safe was exactly what she needed to hear, but it was also exactly what she didn't believe was true. Cole saw the tears. He saw how she struggled to keep them under control. He saw the way she tightened her fingers around the thermal blanket, holding on as if it were the only real thing. And he realized something. He realized it wasn't just fear of what she had seen. It was fear of what would come next. Fear of the consequences. Fear that being there, having witnessed that, would change her life in irreversible ways. And that realization, that subtle reading of something that no one else was noticing, was what separated Cole from the other officers at the scene. "Cassie," he said again, even more softly, "I need to ask you some questions. But if you can't talk now, that's okay. We can do it later. There's no rush." And for the first time, Cassie really looked at him. She turned her face completely and looked into his eyes. And Cole saw it. He saw terror. Pure, specific terror. Not the generic terror of someone who has just witnessed violence, but focused terror. The terror of someone who knows exactly why they are in danger. And that changed everything. "Did you see who shot?" Cole asked. The most important question. The question any investigator would ask. And Cassie hesitated. It was a hesitation of less than 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, Cole read volumes. He saw her eyes briefly drift. He saw her lips part as if to form words, and then close. Again, he saw the way she looked around, at the other officers, at the onlookers who were beginning to gather despite the police tape, and then back at Cole. And then she shook her head. "No," she whispered. But Cole knew it was a lie. Not a malicious lie. Not a lie to cover up a crime. But a lie of self-preservation. A lie born of absolute fear. And in that 2-second hesitation, in that glance around before denying it, Cole understood everything. Cassie had seen it. She knew exactly who had shot, but she was too afraid to say. And if she was too afraid to speak, it meant the danger was real. It meant that whoever was behind it had enough power, enough influence, to silence witnesses. And Cassie, instinctively, knew that. Cole's approach changed immediately. Because most officers would have pressed her. They would have said, "Are you sure? Look again. Try to remember. It's important." But Cole didn't, because he understood something fundamental. Cassie wasn't refusing to cooperate. She was trying to survive. And forcing her to talk right there, at that moment, surrounded by people, under bright lights, with everyone listening, would put her in even greater danger. So Cole simply nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay." And then he did something none of the other officers thought to do. He took out one of his cards, but not the precinct officers. He took a piece of paper from his pocket, scribbled something on it, and handed it to Cassie. "This is my personal number, not the precinct's, my cell phone. If you need anything, anytime, you call. Got it?" Cassie looked at the paper. She looked at the handwritten numbers. And then she looked back at Cole with an expression he would never forget. It was confusion mixed with something resembling faint hope. As if she couldn't understand why anyone would do this. Why anyone would care. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse, broken. "Why are you doing this?" And Cole could have given an official answer. He could have said it was his job, that he was just following protocol. But he didn't, because it wasn't true. He looked at her terrified eyes, at her trembling hands holding that paper, and told her the truth. "Because I believe you're in danger. And because I won't let anything happen to you." It was a big promise. Bigger than he should have made. Bigger than he had the right to make in that situation. But he made it anyway. Because something inside him, some instinct, honed by years of work, told him that. Cassie needed to hear it. Needed to know that someone was on her side. And when he saw the way she clutched that piece of paper to her chest, as if it were something precious, he knew he had done the right thing. But the impact of that interaction went far beyond that moment. Because in the following days, when the investigation began to turn against Cassie, when Detective Holloway began to treat her as a suspect, when the town began to whisper, when the graffiti appeared on her door. Cole was the only person who continued to see the truth. And the truth was that Cassie was a victim. She was a witness. And she was being destroyed not by the criminals, but by the very system that was supposed to protect her. Cole began paying attention to things no one else was. He noticed when Cassie stopped showing up at the bar. He noticed when the rumors started circulating. He noticed the change in how people talked about her. And each observation, each small detail, reinforced his conviction that something was very wrong, not with Cassie, but with the entire investigation. And when he finally went to her trailer that morning, when he saw the graffiti-covered door and the broken window, when he saw the real fear on her face, he knew his initial reading had been correct. Cassie wasn't hiding guilt. She was hiding terror. And terror of that level only came when the danger was real and immediate. Cole's decision to help her, to get her out of that trailer, to protect her personally, that decision wasn't taken lightly. It was made because he had seen something that first night. He had seen it in her eyes. He had seen it in her hesitation. He had seen it in the way she looked around before denying she had seen the shooter. And he knew, with every fiber of his being, that if he didn't do something, Cassie wouldn't survive. Not necessarily killed, but she would be destroyed. And Cole couldn't let that happen. Comment below if you've ever had that moment where someone truly saw you, understood you without you needing to explain. And that changed everything. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the moment Cole knocked on that trailer door was the moment he crossed a line. An invisible but very real line between being an officer doing his job and being a person choosing to get involved. He had gone there officially to ask follow-up questions, to review Cassie's statement, to see if, with some time and distance from the trauma, she would remember more details. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just that. He had gone because he was worried, because he couldn't stop thinking about that hesitation, that terror in her eyes. It was early morning. The sun had barely risen, leaving everything covered in that cold, golden autumn light. Cole parked the car a few meters from the trailer, not wanting to startle Cassie with the sound of the engine being too close. And when he got out and saw the door, he stopped. He stopped completely. The word assassin was there, painted in red that had already begun to drip, creating lines like blood running down the white door of the trailer. The visual impact was brutal, intentional. Someone had done it to terrify, to mark, to say, "We know where you are." Cole felt anger, pure anger rising in his throat, because this wasn't teenage vandalism. This was a threat, calculated intimidation. And when he looked around and saw the broken window, saw the shards of glass still on the ground below, the anger turned into something more urgent, worry. He knocked on the door. "Cassie, it's Sheriff Brennan." Nothing. Silence. But he heard movement inside. He heard footsteps, hesitant, cautious footsteps, and then a voice, hoarse and broken. "Go away, Cassie. I just want to make sure you're okay. I told you to leave." Her voice was louder now, not angry, but desperate, panicked. Cole looked at the door, at that horrible word painted on it, and made a decision. "Cassie, I'm going in, just to see if you're hurt. Is that okay?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned the doorknob. The door wasn't locked. And when he opened it, when he went in, what he saw made him stop in his tracks. Cassie stood in the middle of the small space, holding a kitchen knife with both hands. The blade was pointed at him. Her hands trembled so much that the knife swung in the air. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her hair disheveled. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a week, in the way she held that knife, as if it were the only thing between her and death. Cole understood immediately. She had spent the entire night awake, waiting, terrified, ready to defend herself in any way she could. "Cassie," Cole said slowly, raising his hands in a universal gesture of peace. "It's me. It's okay. You can put the knife down." But she didn't. Her eyes were fixed on him, But Cole wasn't sure if she really saw him. She was somewhere between panic and exhaustion, a dangerous place where instinct replaces reason. "Cassie," he repeated, more firmly. "Look at me. Really look. It's me, Cole. You're safe." And slowly, so slowly, recognition returned to her eyes. The knife lowered a few inches, and then she collapsed. Not literally. She didn't fall, but something inside her broke. Her legs buckled. The knife fell from her hand and hit the floor with a metallic thud that echoed in the silent trailer. And Cassie covered her face with her hands and began to cry. Not a delicate cry. Deep, full-body cry. The kind that comes when you've held everything in for too long and finally, you can't anymore. Cole crossed the space between them in 2 steps. He picked up the knife from the floor, placed it on a table, out of reach. And then, without thinking, without calculating, just acting on human instinct, he put his hands on her shoulders. "You're safe," he said. "I promise. You're safe now." And Cassie, who had spent so much time trusting no one, who had built such high walls around herself, did something she would never do under normal circumstances. She let go. She let the walls fall. She let someone in. She let Cole hold her while she cried. And Cole just stayed there, present, without judging, without pressuring, just being the safe haven she desperately needed. When the crying finally subsided, when Cassie could breathe again, when she finally pulled away and wiped her face with the back of her hand, she said in a voice hoarse from crying, "Get out of here. You need to get out of here." Cole frowned. "Why?" "Because you don't understand," she said, and there was real despair in her voice. "They're going to kill me. Whoever shot those men, they know I saw it. They know I was there. And they'll come back. And if you stay near me, if they see you helping, they'll come after you too." Cole looked around, at the graffiti-covered door, at the broken window, at the shards of glass, at the knife Cassie had held as a last line of defense, and then he looked back at her terrified eyes, at the way she stood there, ready to run, ready to defend herself, ready to do whatever it took to survive. And in that moment, Cole made the most important decision of his career, maybe of his life. "Grab your things," he said. Simple, direct, no room for argument. Cassie blinked. "What? Your things? Clothes, documents, anything you can't leave behind? Grab them now." I don't understand. You're not staying here alone. Not another night. Not another hour. But I have nowhere to go. I don't have. You do now. Come with me." And there was something in the way he said it, something so firm, so certain, that Cassie didn't argue, didn't question, just nodded, and began to gather her things. The transformation that began at that moment was profound, because it wasn't just about physical protection. It was about trust. Cassie, who had learned not to trust anyone, who had survived by keeping everyone at a distance, was now literally placing her life in Cole's hands. And Cole, who had always maintained a professional distance, who had always followed protocol, was now crossing all the lines. He was taking a witness under his personal protection. He was getting involved in a way that could destroy his career. Cassie packed a backpack, clothes, toothbrush, the glass jar with what was left of her savings, photos, books about opening a coffee shop, everything that would fit, everything that mattered. And while she did that, Cole examined the trailer. He looked for signs of forced entry beyond the window. He looked for cameras, for listening devices, because if someone was bullying Cassie so actively, they were probably monitoring her too. And he found one, small, stuck under the kitchen table, a listening device. Cheap, but effective. Someone was listening to everything. Cole didn't say anything. Not at that moment. He just grabbed the device, crushed it under the heel of his boot, and continued the inspection, because revealing what he'd found would be showing his hand. And whoever was behind it, Cole didn't want them to know he was investigating. Not yet. When Cassie was ready, when she had everything packed, She looked around the trailer one last time. That small space that had been home for 4 years. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and now it was being taken from her. One more thing she was losing. You'll come back, Cole said, reading her thoughts. When this is over, when it's safe, you'll come back. What if it's never safe? Cassie asked, and Cole had no answer for that, because it was a real possibility. A terrifying possibility. So he just said, then we figure out a plan B. Together. Together. That word changed something. Because Cassie realized that for the first time in a very, very long time, she wasn't facing something alone. She had someone by her side. Someone willing to fight. Someone willing to protect. Cole took Cassie to a motel on the outskirts of town. Not close. Far. Enough away that no one would see them. Far enough away to buy time. He paid in cash. He registered the room under a false name. And he settled Cassie in with clear instructions. Don't open the door for anyone except him. Don't call anyone. Don't post anything online. Basically, disappear. And Cassie, exhausted, traumatized, but for the first time in days feeling something resembling safety, agreed. Cole left, promising to return that night. And when he left, when he closed the motel room door, and heard Cassie lock it from the inside, he pulled out his cell phone and made the call he knew he had to make. To the only investigator he trusted in the region. And he said, I need help. Unofficial, not on record. And I need you to trust me when I say something very wrong is going on. Because Cole had sensed something. Those dead men weren't random victims. The listening device in Cassie's trailer, the investigation being directed so quickly against her, it all smelled of an operation. Cover-up. And Cole was about to uncover something that went far beyond a roadside bar shooting. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the first 48 hours after Cole installed Cassie in that motel were deceptively calm. To calm, Cole returned the first night as promised. He brought Chinese food from a restaurant 2 towns away, far enough that no one would make connections. He knocked on the door with the pattern they had agreed upon: 3 quick knocks, pause, 2 slow ones. And when Cassie opened it, he saw that she had slept. For the first time in days, she had managed to sleep a few hours. Her eyes were still tired, but no longer with that wild weariness of someone who had spent nights on watch, armed with a kitchen knife. They ate in silence, not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind of silence that exists between people who have been through something intense together, and don't need to fill every second with words. Cole noticed small things. The way Cassie checked the window every few minutes. How she startled at any sound outside. How she sat with her back to the wall, never facing the door. All signs of someone living in survival mode. But she was alive. She was safe. For now. On the second night, Cole returned later. He had spent the day discreetly investigating, asking careful questions, following leads that no one else was following. It was almost 11 o'clock at night when he parked in front of the motel, and immediately something seemed wrong. The light in Cassie's room was off. He had told her to keep it on. Always. It was a sign. If the light was off, it meant trouble. Cole got out of the car faster than he should have, his hand instinctively going to the gun in its holster, and then he heard it. A sound. Metal scraping against metal. Someone was fiddling with the lock on Cassie's room door. Cole didn't think. He just acted. He ran across the parking lot, drew his gun, and yelled, "Police, get away from the door." The figure at the door turned. Cole couldn't see the face. It was dark, and whoever it was wearing a hood. But he saw the body freeze for a fraction of a second, and then run. Run fast, toward the back of the motel. Cole gave chase. His mind automatically registered details. Male, about 6 feet tall, athletic build, practiced movements. It wasn't a random vandal. It was someone skilled. Someone who knew what they were doing. The intruder jumped a fence at the back of the motel with ease, confirming Cole's training. Then he disappeared into the darkness of the woods behind the property. Cole stopped at the fence. He could have kept chasing, but Cassie was alone in that room. Cassie was priority. He ran back, heart pounding, adrenaline pumping. The door to the room was ajar. Now whoever it was had managed to open it before Cole arrived. "Cassie," he shouted, bursting in with his gun raised. And he found her in the bathroom, door locked from the inside. He heard her rapid breathing. On the other side, "Cassie, it's me. Are you okay?" The door opened slowly, and Cassie was there, holding that same kitchen knife, her whole body trembling. "He tried to get in," she said, her voice breaking. "I heard the lock. I turned off the light. I locked myself in the bathroom. I didn't know. I didn't know if it was you or..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Cole lowered the gun. "You did the right thing. You did exactly what you should have." But internally, he was furious. Furious with himself. Because he should have foreseen this. He should have put up surveillance. He should have done more. The revelation came in the following hours. Cole couldn't leave Cassie there. Not anymore. That motel was compromised. Someone had discovered where she was, so he took her somewhere else. A more central, busier hotel, where it would be harder to act without being seen. And while Cassie tried to get some sleep, Cole spent the night doing what he should have done from the beginning, investigating the dead men. The results were disturbing. More than disturbing, they were terrifying. The bullets recovered at the crime scene were military caliber, specifically 5.56 millimeters. Not the kind you buy at any gun store. Not the kind ordinary criminals use. It was the kind used by the military, by special forces, by people with access to specialized equipment. Cole had seen these bullets before, at crime scenes related to cartels, to high-level trafficking operations, not in random roadside bar shootouts. Then he dug deeper into the dead men. Marcus Reed, 38 years old. Criminal record including drug possession, but nothing recent. Officially unemployed. But when Cole made some calls to contacts he had in other jurisdictions, he discovered something no one had mentioned in the official reports. Marcus Reed was an informant. He worked for the sheriff of the neighboring county. He had spent the last 2 years providing information on drug operations in the region. And 3 weeks before he was killed, he had testified in a major federal case. A very major one. The second man, Derek Lowe, had an even more complicated history. 32 years old. Deep connections to trafficking networks that spanned 3 states. But Derek was also an informant. For whom exactly, Cole couldn't immediately confirm. But he had a growing, terrifying suspicion. Both dead men were people who knew too much. Who had information. Who had talked. And now, they were dead. Executed in a roadside bar parking lot. And Cassie had seen it all. Cole's understanding of the case was completely transformed at that moment. Because this wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a bar fight that got out of control. It was an execution. It was silencing. It was the kind of thing that happens when there's something much bigger at stake. Something involving powerful people. And Cassie, by sheer bad luck, by being in the wrong place, doing her job, had become a witness to something that could bring down entire operations, could expose corruption, could put important people in prison. And those people weren't going to let that happen. Cole returned to the hotel where he had left Cassie as the sun was beginning to rise. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night connecting the dots, making discreet calls, gathering information. And now he had to tell Cassie the truth. He had to tell her just how deep this really went. She was awake when he arrived. Sitting on the bed, hugging her knees, staring at the door. "You found something out," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. She saw it in his face. Cole sat in the chair across from her. He didn't know how to soften the blow, so he didn't try. The men who died that night, they were informants. Both of them. They worked passing information about criminal operations to the authorities. And 3 weeks ago, One of them testified in a federal case. A big case. Cassie processed that. So they were killed for testifying. Yes. And you? Cole paused. He breathed. You saw who did it, which means you've become next on the list. The impact of those words was visible. Cassie went pale. Her hands gripped her knees tighter. But I don't know anything. I don't know about federal cases or operations or... You know who pulled the trigger, Cole said gently. And that's enough. Because if you identify the shooter, it can lead you to who ordered the killing. And those people have a lot to lose. Cassie closed her eyes. Then they'll never stop. They'll never stop chasing me. And Cole couldn't lie. He couldn't give false hope. Not while you're a threat. The silence that followed was heavy. Cassie opened her eyes. She looked at Cole. So what do? I can't live like this. I can't spend the rest of my life running, hiding, waiting for someone to find me. And Cole, who had spent the entire night thinking about exactly that, said, We proved who did it. We gathered enough solid evidence that you won't be the only witness. We built such a strong case that no matter what happens to you, the truth will come out anyway. And how do we do that? Cassie asked. You have to tell me what you saw. Everything. Every detail. Because I need to know who I'm looking for. The emotional journey that had led Cassie to the point of trusting Cole enough to speak had been intense. And now, sitting in that anonymous hotel room, with the dim morning light streaming through the window, she was finally ready. Ready to tell. Ready to stop running. Ready to fight. She took a deep breath and began. There were two men. Not the ones who died. The ones who shot. They were waiting in the parking lot. I saw through the window. I saw Marcus and Derek leave the bar. I saw the two men approaching. And then she stopped. The memory was too clear. Too painful. I saw them raise their guns. And shoot. 3 times. Quick. Professional. And then they left. They left. Did you see the faces? Cole asked. Cassie nodded. One of them. The other had his back turned. But one, I saw. And Cole. She looked at him with eyes full of fear. I recognized him. I don't know his name, but I'd seen him before. At the bar, talking to people. Always well dressed. Always with an air of authority. And she swallowed hard. I think he was a cop, or he was. Or something like that. And at that moment, everything made sense to Cole. Terrible, frightening sense. Because if a police officer was involved, if there was corruption within the system, then nobody was trustworthy. Nobody except him. And Cassie was in far greater danger than he had imagined. Comment below if you've ever noticed that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from outside the system, but from within it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the moment Cole realized there was police corruption involved was the moment everything changed. Not just for the investigation, but for him personally. Because Cole had joined the police force, believing in the system. Believing that, despite all the flaws, despite all the bureaucracy, in the end, the system existed to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. But now, he was faced with evidence that the system itself was compromised. And that shook something fundamental within him. He spent the rest of that morning in the hotel room with Cassie, having her describe the man she had seen. Details, height, build, striking features. Cassie remembered more than she thought she would. The human brain is like that when you witness something traumatic. Your mind records details you don't even consciously perceive. She described a man in his early 40s, graying hair at the temples, broad shoulders, a military posture, and a scar, small but visible, above his left eyebrow. Cole listened, took mental notes, and felt the growing weight of each detail. Because he knew someone who fit that description. Not quite, not perfectly, but close enough to be worrying. When Cassie finished, when she couldn't remember anything else without straining her memory, Cole said he needed to make a few calls. He said he'd be right back, and he went to the car. He sat in the driver's seat, doors locked, and pulled out his cell phone. He knew what he had to do. The protocol was clear. A case of this size, with these implications, had to be passed on to a higher jurisdiction, state police, maybe federal. It wasn't something a small county sheriff could or should handle alone. So he dialed the State Department's number, and when they answered, he asked to speak to the chief investigator. The call lasted 15 minutes. Cole explained the situation. He explained about the shooting, about Cassie, about the military bullets, about the dead informants. He explained that he had a witness who could identify one of the shooters, and he waited. He waited for the answer that would make everything right, for the guarantee that Cassie would be adequately protected, for the confirmation that the system would work. But what he heard was something completely different. The investigator on the other end of the line was silent for far too long. And then he said, "Sheriff Brennan, we are already aware of this case, and we have already received information that the witness in question is, in fact, a suspect, not a victim." Cole felt his stomach clench. "Who gave you this information?" "I can't divulge sources. In an active investigation, that information is wrong. Completely wrong. Cassie Reeves is a witness. She saw the shooters. She can identify Sheriff Brennan," the investigator interrupted, his voice sounding almost wary. "I understand you want to help, but we already have the case. We already have the information we need. And frankly, your proximity to the suspect is raising some concerns." Proximity. The word was carefully chosen. It implied something. It suggested impropriety. And Cole understood immediately what was happening. Someone was controlling the narrative. Someone with access to official channels. Someone who had gotten there first and planted the idea that Cassie was the problem. "If I bring Cassie to you," Cole asked, choosing each word carefully, "will she be placed under witness protection?" Another pause. "She will be properly interrogated. And then we will make the appropriate decisions based on that interrogation." It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a guarantee. It was bureaucratic language that promised nothing. And Cole, who had made enough connections over his career, knew how to read between the lines. If he handed Cassie over, she wouldn't be protected. She would be silenced. Maybe not openly. Maybe not immediately. But she would be. Because there were people within the system working to ensure she never spoke. Cole hung up. He sat there in the silence of the car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, eyes closed, breathing, because he was facing a choice, the choice that would define not only this case, but who he was as a person. He could follow protocol. He could take Cassie to the state police, fill out the appropriate forms, pass the case up, and wash his hands of it. It would be the safe thing to do, the thing that would protect his career, the thing that would keep him within the rules. But Cassie would probably die. Maybe not physically, immediately, but she would be destroyed. She would be silenced, one way or another. Or he could do the unthinkable. He could act alone. He could keep Cassie hidden and investigate on his own. He could cross every professional line that existed. He could risk every thinker, reputation, future, to protect a woman he barely knew. A woman the system had decided was disposable. And the choice, when Cole really thought about it, wasn't as difficult as it should have been. Because he remembered why he had become a police officer. Not to blindly follow rules, but to protect people. And when the system failed to do that, when the system became the danger, then someone had to be on the right side. Even if it meant being alone. Cole returned to the room. Cassie was where he had left her, sitting on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees. She looked at him as he entered. She read his face. What happened? Cole closed the door, locked it, and then sat in the chair opposite her. "I called the state police to pass the case on to them, to ensure you would have adequate protection." Cassie waited, and someone got there before me. Someone had already contacted them, saying you're a suspect, that you're involved, that you can't be trusted. Cassie closed her eyes. So it's true. They have people everywhere. People inside the police force. People who can control what happens to me. It seems so. So what do we do? Where do I go? If I can't trust the police, if I can't trust the system, what's left for me? And Cole, looking at her, at the fear and despair on her face, made the final decision. The decision that would change everything. You trust me, he said. Just like that. But you're part of the system, Cassie pointed out. You're sheriff. You're exactly the kind of person I'm supposedly not supposed to trust. I am, Cole admitted. But I'm also the only person right now who is choosing to believe you. Who is choosing to protect you above protocol, above career, above everything. He leaned forward. Cassie, I'm not going to lie to you. What I'm proposing is risky. For you and for me. If we stay in this together, if I keep hiding you and investigating alone, I'll cross lines I shouldn't cross. I'll break rules. And if they find out, my career is over. Maybe more than that. Then why do it? Cassie asked. Why risk all this for me? Cole didn't have a simple answer. He didn't have an answer that made rational sense. So he gave the honest answer. Because when I look at you, I see someone who doesn't deserve what's happening. Someone who was just living their life, working honestly, and was thrown into the middle of something they didn't create. And the system that's supposed to protect you is failing. It's worse than failing, it's actively working against you. And he paused, he breathed. I can't be a part of this. I can't look at you and choose protocol over doing what's right. The transformation in Cassie's expression was gradual. The fear was still there. But something else began to emerge. Something like hope. Not naive hope, but the hope that comes when you realize you're not completely alone. That someone chose to stay. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I trust you. And those words, coming from someone who had every reason not to trust anyone, meant more to Cole than any medal or promotion he could receive. But the reality of their decision began to weigh on them immediately. Because now Cole was officially operating outside the system. He was hiding a witness that other departments considered suspicious. He was investigating a case that officially wasn't his anymore. And every move he made from that moment on had to be careful, calculated. Because if they found out, it wouldn't just be his career at risk. It would be Cassie's life. Cole began working on a plan. He couldn't use official resources. He couldn't access police databases without leaving a trace. He couldn't ask other officers for help without risking a leak. So he would have to do everything. Manually, the old-fashioned way. Discreet conversations. Following leads in person. Using contacts he had outside the system. It would be slow. It would be difficult. But it was the only way. And in the meantime, Cassie would have to remain hidden. She would have to trust him completely. Because she had no one else. The emotional journey between them changed that day. Because it was no longer just protector and protected. It was partnership. It was two people against something much bigger than themselves. It was the shared decision that some principles are worth more than security. That doing the right thing sometimes means risking everything. And that sometimes, when the system fails, all you have is the choice of one person to stand by your side. One person willing to see you as human when everyone else sees you as a problem. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the days that followed that decision were a transformative journey for both of them. Cole and Cassie began a strange, almost surreal routine. They would wake up in a motel. They would pack everything up. Cole would check the parking lot, make sure they weren't being followed, and then they would drive to another place, sometimes an hour away, sometimes two, never the same place twice, never in cities where Cole was recognized. They became ghosts, nomads, two people existing in the spaces between places, always on the move, always looking over their shoulders. At first, it was tense, almost unbearably tense. Cassie sat in the passenger seat, her whole body turned toward the window, checking every passing car, every person who looked in their direction. She barely spoke. She answered Cole's questions with monosyllables. Yes, no, maybe. And Cole understood. He understood that for her, Trusting a police officer, trusting any authority figure, went against all the survival instincts she had developed. Especially now, knowing there was corruption within the system. So he didn't pressure her, he didn't force conversations, he just drove and waited. Cole started doing small things. Things that, on the surface, seemed insignificant, but that carried meaning. Every morning, he would stop at a coffee shop and buy coffee. And he always asked, "How do you want it?" On the first day, Cassie simply said, "Any." But Cole gently insisted, "No. How do you really want it?" "Black. With milk. Sweet." And Cassie, surprised by the question, by the attention to detail, said, "With milk, too. Spoonfuls of sugar." And from that day on, it was always like that. Coffee with milk and 2 spoonfuls of sugar. A small act, but one that said, "I see you. I pay attention. Your preferences matter." He did the same with food. "What do you want to eat?" "It doesn't matter." "Yes, it does." "Do you like Thai food? Mexican? Pizza? What makes you feel better?" And slowly, Cassie began to truly answer. She began to express preferences. She began to realize that Cole really wanted to know. He wasn't just fulfilling an obligation. He was genuinely trying to make that horrible situation a little less horrible. And that careful attention to small details began to melt the ice around her heart. On the 3rd day, they were at a motel near the state border. It was late at night. Cole had brought Chinese food. They were eating in silence, that silence that had become the norm, when Cassie suddenly said, "Thank you." Cole looked at her. "For what?" "For all of this. For the food. For the coffee. For asking what I want. For treating me like a person." And there was something so sad in that sentence. In the way she said it, as if being treated like a person was exceptional, that Cole felt a pang in his chest. "You're a person," he said, "and you deserve to be treated as such. You always have." Cassie looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, Cole saw something different in her eyes. Not just fear, but curiosity. "Why did you become a police officer?" she asked. Question caught him off guard. Nobody asked that. At least not really. "My younger brother," Cole answered after a moment. "Jake. He was 17 when he was killed. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The gang thought he was from a rival faction. He wasn't. He was just coming home from school." Cole stopped. He hadn't spoken about Jake in years. The police investigated, but not much. You know how it is. Poor kid, bad neighborhood. They assumed he was involved in something. It didn't matter that I said he wasn't. It didn't matter that my mother begged for justice. They closed the case. Said there were no leads. But the truth is, they just didn't care enough." He looked at Cassie. "So I became a police officer. Not to blindly follow rules, but to be the kind of officer I wish had helped Jake. The kind who really sees people. Who cares." The revelation created something between them. A bridge. Because Cassie understood. She understood that Cole knew what it was like to be discarded by the system. He knew what it was like to cry out for help and be ignored. And that changed the dynamic. Because now, he wasn't just the police officer protecting her. He was someone who had lived through similar pain. Someone who understood. And slowly, carefully, Cassie began to open up to. She talked about the marriage. About Daniel, her ex-husband. About how charming he was at first. Attentive. About how the change was gradual. Small comments about her clothes. About her friends. About how she spent her time. And then the comments became demands. And the demands became control. And the control eventually became violence. "I thought it was my fault," Cassie said, looking at her own hands. "I thought if I was a better wife, if I did everything right, he would stop. But he never stopped. It only got worse." Cole listened without interrupting, without judging. And when she finished, when she told him about the night she finally ran away, about how she had left everything behind and started from scratch, he simply said, "You're one of the bravest people I know." And Cassie laughed. A bitter laugh. "Brave. I'm hiding in motels. I'm afraid of shadows. I'm not brave. You are, Cole insisted. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward, despite it. It's rebuilding when everything falls apart. It's surviving when it would be easier to give up. The conversations grew longer, deeper. They talked late into the night, when danger seemed distant and the darkness created a kind of forced intimacy. Cole told him about his father, also a policeman, who had died in the line of duty when Cole was 15. About how he had idealized the profession because of it, but also about how, over the years, he had become disillusioned. He had seen the corruption. He had seen how the system protected the powerful and punished the vulnerable. Sometimes I wonder, he said one night, if my father would be proud. Or if he would be disappointed, seeing what the profession has become. Cassie talked about her dreams, about that little cafe she wanted to open, about how she had saved every penny, about the recipes she wanted to serve. It sounds silly now, she said, with everything that's going on, but it was all I wanted, just a place of my own, where I could create something, where people would come and feel welcome. It's not silly, Cole said, and you're still going to have it. When all this is over, you'll have your cafe. Promise. The emotional connection between them wasn't dramatic. There was no cinematic kiss or passionate declaration. It was more subtle, more real. It was built on small gestures. In the way Cole always checked if Cassie had eaten before eating himself. In the way Cassie started making him coffee in the morning, remembering that he liked it black, without sugar. It was in the way he let her choose the TV channel at the motel. In the way she started laughing, again not a lot, not yet, but small. Laughs that showed she was beginning to feel human again. It was the moment Cole woke up in the middle of the night to Cassie screaming, a nightmare. He immediately jumped up, crossed the motel room, and sat on the edge of her bed. Cassie, you're safe. It's just a dream. She woke up, gasping, disoriented, tears streaming down her face. And without thinking, without calculating, Cole took her hand. He just held it, and said, I'm here. You're not alone. And Cassie, instead of pulling away, squeezed back. She held his hand as if it were the only real thing in the world. And they stayed like that for a long time, without speaking, just being. Their journey was changing them both. Cole was learning that doing the right thing sometimes means breaking all the rules. He was learning that protocol and justice aren't always the same thing. He was learning to listen to his conscience above his badge. And Cassie was learning that not everyone betrays her, that not everyone will hurt her, that trust is scary, but possible, that she deserves to be protected, valued, and heard. And somewhere between the motels and the roads and the late-night conversations, something began to grow. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something prior. It was foundation. It was two people seeing each other completely. Without masks, without pretenses. Just vulnerable humans trying to survive something impossible. And discovering that maybe, together, they could do more than just survive. Maybe they could win. Comment below if you think it's possible to build real trust amidst chaos, or if danger always prevents genuine connections. Now I want to delve even deeper into this matter, because the discovery of the truth didn't come in a clean or cinematic way. It came after 2 weeks of exhausting work, sleepless nights, of Cole following clues that most people would have ignored. He had started with what Cassie remembered, that man with the scar above his eyebrow, and through discreet conversations, with contacts he had in different departments, through careful analysis of public records, through personal surveillance that technically crossed all legal lines, Cole began to piece together a picture. And the picture was much worse than he had imagined. It wasn't just one corrupt cop, it was a network. A network carefully constructed over years involving local officers, members of the neighboring county's narcotics department, and deep connections to trafficking operations that spanned multiple states. Marcus and Derek, the dead men, weren't just random informants. They were pieces in a much larger game. They had information about trafficking routes, about shipments, about who within the police force was facilitating the movement of drugs. And when they started cooperating with federal agents, when they started giving specific names, they signed their own death warrants. Cole tracked financial movements. He found suspicious transfers, money changing hands through shell companies, properties bought by people who officially had no income to buy them, expensive cars in the garages of officers with modest salaries. And at the center of it all, he found a name: Lieutenant Marcus Hayward, a veteran officer in the narcotics department, respected, decorated, and completely corrupt. The man with the scar above his eyebrow. The man Cassie had seen shoot. But Cole couldn't simply arrest Hayward. He had no jurisdiction, no authority. And most importantly, I wasn't sure who else was involved. So he did something risky. He contacted an investigative journalist he knew. Someone outside the system. Someone with a reputation for not being bought. And he handed everything over. All the evidence, all the documents, all the connections, on one condition: that Cassie be kept anonymous, that her identity never be revealed. Because even with the evidence, even exposing the corruption, Cassie would still be a target if the right people knew she was the witness. The impact was immediate. The story exploded. Front page, headlines: police corruption ring exposed. Officers facilitated drug trafficking. The feds had no choice but to act. Warrants were issued. Searches were executed. And within 48 hours, 3 people were arrested. Lieutenant Marcus Hayward, a sergeant from the local department, and Detective Frank Holloway, same one who had tried to frame Cassie from the start. It turned out that Holloway was on the payroll, deliberately steering investigations away from the real criminals and toward convenient scapegoats. Cole was driving when the news started coming out. Cassie was beside him, looking at his phone, reading the headlines with disbelief. "They've been arrested," she whispered. "Really arrested?" "Yes. So, it's over." And Cole wanted to say yes. He wanted to give her that reassurance, but he couldn't lie. Partially. Immediate danger. Yes, Hayward is in custody. Holloway can no longer manipulate the investigation. And officially, you've been completely cleared. There's no more suspicion against you. Cassie let out a sigh that seemed to have been held back for weeks. "But," she asked, because she heard the hesitation in his voice. "But that's just the tip of the iceberg," Cole said. "Hayward and the others, they were the executors, the intermediaries. But there are people above them, people who financed the operation, people in higher positions who weren't touched. And those people," he paused, "those people are still out there, and they still know you exist." The relief on Cassie's face lessened. "So it never really ends. You're safer, much safer, but completely safe." "Not yet." The honesty was brutal, but necessary. Cole pulled the car over to a roadside lookout point. He turned off the engine. He turned to Cassie. "Look, what this means is, you can go back. You can go back to town. The police aren't chasing you anymore. You can have your life back." Cassie looked at him. "What life? I don't have a job. I don't have a house. The trailer has probably already been rented to someone else. My reputation is ruined. And even if people see the news, even if they see that I was right all along, how many will actually believe me? How many will admit they were wrong? It was true. And it hurt. Because justice on paper doesn't erase the damage that was done." Cassie was free of legal charges. But she was still trapped in other ways. Trapped by the poverty that the last few weeks had forced upon her. Trapped by the trauma that never completely went away. Trapped by the loss of everything she had built. "And now," she asked, "what do I do now?" And Cole didn't have an easy answer. Because he could protect her from physical danger. But he couldn't protect her from the harsh reality of rebuilding a life from scratch. Again, they drove back to town that afternoon. For the first time in weeks. And when Cassie saw the familiar places, the road, the bar where it all began, she felt something strange. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't relief. It was loss. because that place that had been home now felt strange, alien, as if she had changed so much in the last few weeks that she no longer fit there. Cole led her to the trailer. The door still had traces of graffiti, though someone had tried to clean it. The window had been repaired. But inside, when Cassie entered, it was empty. Her things had been packed and put in boxes by someone, probably the trailer park manager. Everything was there, but it wasn't home anymore. Cassie sat on one of the boxes. She looked around, and suddenly, it all hit her. Everything she had lost, everything that had been taken from her. She didn't cry, she was beyond tears. She just sat there, in the middle of that space that used to be hers, and felt the crushing weight of having to start over. I was so close, she said, more to herself than to Cole. So close to having enough for coffee. So close to finally having something of my own. Now, she gestured vaguely to the boxes. Now I'm back to the beginning. Worse than the beginning. Cole didn't know what to say. There were no words that could fix this. So he just sat beside her in the box, shoulder to shoulder, silent presence. And after a long time, Cassie said, "Thank you. For everything. For protecting me. For believing in me." For her voice faltered. "For making me feel like I was worth saving." "You were always worth it," Cole said. "Always." And then Cassie did something that surprised them both. She rested her head on his shoulder. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sexual. It was just exhaustion. It was the need for physical support when everything inside her felt like it was falling apart. Cole stood completely still. He didn't want to spoil the moment. He didn't want her to regret her vulnerability, so he just let it go. He let her rest. He let her have that moment of weakness. And he realized something he'd been building up for weeks, but hadn't wanted to admit. He wasn't just protecting Cassie because it was the right thing to do. He wasn't just investigating because it was fair. He cared. He cared deeply, in a way that went beyond professional duty, in a way that was personal, frighteningly personal. But he didn't say anything, because it wasn't the time. Not when Cassie was struggling just to stay whole. So he just stood there. And eventually, Cassie stood up, wiped her face, and said, "I need to look for a job. I need to find a place to stay. You need to breathe." Cole interrupted gently. "You just came out of weeks of trauma. You have time. You don't need to solve everything today. But I don't have money." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because the days that followed, that afternoon in the trailer, were a period of silent transformation for both of them. Cole had managed to get Cassie a temporary room in a more decent motel, away from the center, where she could have privacy while she decided what to do. He paid a week in advance. He said it wasn't charity, but necessity. She needed time to process, to recover, to think. And Cassie, too exhausted to argue, accepted. Cole came back every day. Not at fixed times, he varied them to avoid creating patterns. Sometimes in the morning, bringing coffee and something to eat. Sometimes in the afternoon, just to check if she was okay. And Cassie began to notice something. She started to expect these visits. She started hearing cars in the parking lot, wondering if it was him. She began to feel relief when she saw his face, and that scared her, because she had promised herself, after Daniel, after everything she had been through, that she would never again depend on anyone, that she would never again let someone become so important that their absence would hurt. But Cole had already become important, not because of grand romantic gestures, but because he was present, because he showed up, because he kept every promise, because he treated her like a person when the rest of the world had treated her like a problem. And Cassie didn't know what to do with those feelings. She didn't know if they were real or just the result of trauma, of the dependency syndrome that happens when someone saves you. So she did what she always did when things got complicated. She decided to run away. It was a Friday morning. Cassie woke up and made the decision. She couldn't stay. Not in that city where everyone still whispered about her. Not in that state where the threat, though diminished, still existed. And not near Cole. especially not near Cole, because staying near him meant risking opening herself up again. It meant risking being hurt again, and she wasn't sure if she would survive that again. So she started packing. The same things from the backpack she'd carried for weeks: clothes, documents, the glass jar with what was left of her savings, the books about opening a cafe that now seemed like cruel jokes. She wrote a note. Cole, thank you for everything. You saved my life in more ways than I can count, but I need to go. I need to start over somewhere where nobody knows me, where nobody knows what happened. Please don't look for me. Take care, Cassie. She left the note on the table, grabbed her backpack, and left the room. It was 10 in the morning. Cole usually didn't show up before noon. She would have time to hit the road before he noticed. Time to put some distance between them before she changed her mind. But when Cassie left the room, when she turned toward the parking lot where her old car was waiting, she saw him, Cole, leaning against his car, arms crossed, looking directly at her, as if he had been waiting, as if he knew. Cassie froze. Her first instinct was to go back to the room, lock the door, wait for him to leave. But she couldn't do that. Not with Cole. So she took a deep breath, adjusted her backpack on her shoulders, and walked over to him. You were leaving, Cole said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. How did you know? Cassie asked. Cole gave a sad half smile. I know that look. I saw it last night when I passed by here. It's the look of someone who's already made the decision to run. And I understand. I completely understand. Cassie hadn't expected that. She expected an argument. She expected him to try to convince her to stay. But he was just understanding, and that somehow made everything more difficult. I can't stay here, Cole, she said, her voice firmer than it felt. I can't rebuild in this place. There's too much history, too much pain. I need to go where nobody knows who I am, where I can just exist without all this weight. Cole nodded. That makes sense. And you have every right to do that. Every right to start over wherever you want. He paused. Where are you going? Cassie shrugged. I don't know. West, maybe, or north. Anywhere that's far from here. Alone, Cole said. It wasn't a question. Cassie met his eyes. I've always been alone. I've always managed. I'll get through it again. And Cole saw it. He saw the armor she was rebuilding. The walls she had begun to tear down during those weeks together were being erected again, brick by brick. And he understood why. Because staying, trusting, opening up, all of that was terrifying, especially for someone who had been betrayed so many times. Running away was safer, easier, more controllable. But Cole also knew something Cassie was still learning. He knew that safety isn't the same as living, that protection isn't the same as peace, that you can spend your whole life building walls to keep the pain out, but eventually those walls also keep all the good out. So he took a step toward her, not too close, just enough for her to feel his presence. You can run, he said gently. You can rebuild somewhere else. You can start from scratch in a town where nobody knows your name or your story. And maybe that will work. Maybe you'll find peace there. He paused. He chose his next words carefully. But Cassie, you don't have to do this alone. And you don't have to live in fear forever. Because I'll be here, no matter where you go. No matter how long it takes. If you need me, I'll be here. Cassie felt something break in her chest. Something she had kept carefully controlled. Why? She asked, her voice more broken than intended. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. You risked your career, your life, for me. And now you're telling me, you'll be here. Why? Cole could have given a confident answer. He could have said that was just who he was, that he would do the same for anyone. But after everything they'd been through together, after all the late-night conversations and shared truths, he owed her complete honesty. Because at some point during these last few weeks, he said slowly, you stopped being just someone I was protecting. You became someone I care about, on a level I didn't plan for and didn't expect. and I don't know exactly when it happened or how. I just know that the idea of you leaving, of not knowing if you're okay, of not," he paused, he breathed, "of not seeing you again. That idea hurts, and I don't want to force anything. I don't want you to stay for me. I want you to do what's best for you. But I also want you to know that you have choices. And one of those choices is not being alone." Cassie was motionless. She stared at him with an expression Cole couldn't quite read. There was fear there, but also something else. Something that felt like hope fighting against years of self-preservation. "What if I don't know how to do this?" she asked softly. "How can I not be alone? I've spent so much time protecting myself that I don't even know how to let someone in." "We'll figure it out together," Cole said. "One day at a time. No pressure. No expectations. Just together." Cassie looked at the backpack on her shoulders, then at her car in the parking lot, then back at Cole. And for the first time in weeks, for the first time since it all began, she wasn't sure what to do. Because running away was what she always did. It was what kept her safe. But Cole was offering something different. He was offering to stay. Offer they were going to fight. Offering not just survival, but the possibility of truly living. And Cassie didn't know if she was brave enough to accept. "I'm scared," she admitted. Scared of staying and everything falling apart again. Scared of trusting and getting hurt. Scared of feeling. Cole finished for her. "I know. I'm scared too. Scared of not being enough. Scared of letting you down. Scared that one day you'll look at me and see only the uniform, only the system that failed you." He took a step closer. "But maybe being scared together is better than being safe alone." Cassie closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, there was something different in them. Not complete certainty, but possibility. The slightest opening that maybe, just maybe, she could try. She let her backpack slip from her shoulders. It fell to the floor, and she looked at Cole. "I don't know if this will work. I don't know if I know how to do this." "Neither do I," Cole admitted. "But I want to try. If you want to." And Cassie, for the first time in weeks, for the first time maybe in years, didn't immediately say no. She didn't grab her backpack and run. She just stood there, looking at the man who had chosen to stay when everyone else had left. And she said, so softly it was barely audible, "Okay, we'll try." And this is where their journey ends, for now. Not because the story is over. Stories like this never truly end. They just change form. Cassie and Cole didn't have all the answers. They had no guarantees. They didn't know if what they were feeling was love, or just the result of surviving something impossible together. But they had something more important than certainty. They had a choice. The choice not to face what came next alone. The choice to try, even with fear. The choice to believe that maybe, just maybe, after everything she'd been through, Cassie deserved not only to survive, but to live. And Cole? Cole had learned that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking all the rules. That protocol and justice don't always go hand in hand. That a badge can give you authority, but it's the choice to stand with those who have no power that gives you character. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you want to keep following stories about real people facing real injustices, about protection that goes beyond duty, about connections that form amidst chaos, subscribing here is the way to continue walking with me. Because every week I bring you stories like this, stories that deeply touch you, that make you feel, that remind you that in the midst of all the darkness, there are still people willing to light a light. Comment below. I'm with you until the end. I want to know if you felt this way. If Cassie and Cole resonated with you the same way they resonated with me. Every comment tells me I'm not alone here, and that matters. And if this touched you in any way, if at any point you held your breath, if you rooted for Cassie, if you believed in Cole, if you felt the injustice or the hope or the fear, leave a like so I know. Because these stories are about connection, and the like tells me that the connection happened. There's a video over here that continues in the same vein. Another story about someone being unfairly judged. About a protector who chooses the right side even when everyone else chooses the wrong one. Click and follow along there. Because the journey doesn't end. It just continues in another place, with other people, but always with the same truth at its core. Everyone deserves to be seen, protected, and believed. See you there.